Hello and welcome back to the garage. My name is Matt. This is Matt's Motorworks. This is my 2002 Subaru Impreza WRX Wagon. Today, we are going to be going start to finish on the driver's side of the car, how to convert your wagon to full sedan wide body in the rear, stitching that quarter panel on, including everything, drilling rivets to final welding. Stay tuned as we go through the entire process so you can do this yourself in the garage. Hello and welcome back to the garage. It has been quite a while. It is the 26th of December 2023. We just got this thing back down onto all four wheels. It's looking nice on this side, let me tell you. I'm going to pull this thing out and kind of just move it over this way a little bit so that we can start work doing the other side quarter panel. I already signed up for events for the 2024 season, so we kind of need to get this thing going. And we don't have a proper sound clip of the car, so we'll be getting that too. Cool. I do have to put this thing, let me come back in here. Let's try this again. I do have to put this thing back up on jack stands so we can start working in this area, but while I got this window section kind of in my teeth, we're going to mask off the quarter panel the same way we did the other side. I'll start by cleaning up this area first. All right, we have Chemical Guys, synthetic quick detailer. Extreme Slick Polymer Detailer. I don't know. I think it'll do the job just fine. I have not detailed my cars, admittedly, in way too long. Maybe one more. Oh, this is going right onto dust. That's okay. Good enough. One thing I wanted to do before we start cutting like last time is I actually wanted to, well, this is one piece, strip the metal off where my cut line is gonna be so that I don't have to worry about trying to do it on flimsy metal later when I need to get a good surface for welding. How I did this before, I think it was like something like that. Not down there, but I might have to go back and look at my footage real quick and see. But I think it was like somewhere right across here. That doesn't matter though. I'm gonna grab the stripper wheel, my angle grinder, throw a mask on, maybe get the vacuum going behind me, and strip the paint off of here. All right, I have a stripper wheel, which is a new thing for me. Trying to see how this does, I guess. Thing up on jack stands. All right, we are up on jack stands. I pulled the wheel off, draped a shop t-shirt over the hub and the brakes so we don't get that all crusty. What I'm going to do now is go around. I still have to grind this area out and clean it up, kind of determine where the line is going to be. But I'm going to go around and just try to get a pilot going on all of our spot welds. That looks pretty good. It's brushed metal. Any hoos. That looks pretty good. I think the only thing that we can do from here is start drilling out spot welds, but I can see I'm almost out of storage on my camera here, so I'm gonna have to deal with that first. Progress though. All right, now it's time to go start the left side rear panel conversion. Theoretically, this is the easier side since there's no gas filler door or filler neck to line up. In truth, I didn't have an issue with that. What I did notice is the rear end of a wagon is not symmetrical. I was able to move a lot of the inner structure on the right side by hitting really hard with a big hammer, but I can't do that on the left side. More on that later. As with any good project, you start by starting, and then realize you didn't do any prep work. I made the mistake on the other side of not covering the rear window and glass until I was already pretty deep in the process. I knew sparks from grinding and welding would hit the window, and they did. Cover your glass and prep your work area first. Please learn from me. One of the most tedious parts of this process was drilling out spot welds. I didn't think of it until the last of the 4 quarter panels on this project, but I decided to drill a pilot hole straight through the middle of the spot weld to center the spot weld cutter. It worked pretty well. I had to fill those little holes with weld later, but that turned out to be way easier than I anticipated. There's 2 main areas to be careful removing spot welds on the wagon. The first is the rear area underneath the taillight and bumper structure. The body of the wagon here is just a single layer of sheet metal and it's pretty flimsy. It's pretty inconsequential to the structure of the car and mounting rigidity of the quarter panel, but keeping it intact and taking care not to bend it and mangle it too badly while removing the spot welds and popping the panel free of the seam sealer gives a solid reference surface for the new quarter panel and where the flanges should ultimately line up. The other area, for similar reasons, is the wheel arch. Drilling the pilot holes here was fine, but I couldn't always tell how much pressure or how deep I was cutting with the spot weld bit. This was particularly important on the Sedan shell, and cutting through the wheel arch flange was a lot of material removed that was very hard to recreate and weld later. Try not to let the spot weld cutter drill through where possible. I don't exactly know why I used tape to mark the cutting line here. Sharpie is kind of dark. A paint marker would work too. The tape is useful as a guide to fit the new quarter panel though, and I'll show that later. For the most part, you can use a cutoff wheel to remove the wagon quarter panel. You can cut excessively and aggressively into the panel to make the corners. You're scrapping the panel anyway. I copied the lines from the JN garage post, and I liked how the door jamb ended up fitting perfectly, even with the complex cuts. I left the little tab of sheet metal around the pressure vent area toward the back, just like I did on the right-hand side of the car. I'm still not entirely sure if this is necessary, but it definitely helped with lining up the new panel to the wagon body. I definitely think cutting around the taillight area and following the curve helps with reducing the bulge from dissimilar panels and more naturally allows the sedan quarter panel to meet up with the more narrow wagon taillight housings. Then to remove the seam sealer from the wagon body and the sedan rear quarter panels. There was a lot of it, everywhere. Again, using tape to mark my cut, I took a decent amount off the quarter panel on the top and around the taillight housing. I cut way more than I needed off of the sedan, and for good measure. I certainly didn't want to wind up with less corner panel than needed for the project. Now, the best place in my opinion to start fitting and matching the sedan quarter panel to the wagon is the door jamb. The curves, location, and shape of the door jamb spot weld area is identical on the sedan and wagon from what I can tell. Even the spot welds are pretty similar in location. I use 2 or 3 Cleco pins to hold the panel into place along this edge, and I can start trimming from there. You can see me down at the rocker panel first after getting the door jamb lined up. I used the tape width method to figure out how much I needed to trim in this spot weld area and along the top cut line. One thing that I really messed up on the right side of the car was the line of the quarter panel matching up with the body line on the wagon down at the bumper. The right side of the car, the quarter panel is slightly below where it should be, and it creates a really weird radius and gap that it took me a really long time to fill and try to fit the bumper into, and there's still a gap. This bottom edge with the quarter panel is probably the most important edge to get right throughout this whole process. I spent a lot of time in the door jamb area. I made a lot of complex cuts and corners, and I copied the JN Garage post on how they cut across the quarter panel. I think by creating a step down a couple times, I'm able to maneuver the metal on the body and the quarter panel to match up a little better, and it made for a much cleaner radius and interface between the two panels. I've read a ton of conflicting opinions on the internet about using flanges to weld panels to versus butt welding directly. Considering I'm doing bodywork for the first time ever and welding for like the 5th time ever with a cheap flux core welder, I decided a flange would be significantly easier to attach the panel to. This Harbor Freight flange tool bends the sheet metal on the wagon body down to a flange depth nearly the exact thickness of the quarter panel. Laying the panel onto the flange gives me a massive area for Clecos, and welding the panels together will fill that seam and reduce the final amount of body filling and body work I need to do. That seems like a win-win to me. I mentioned the tape width method earlier. I'll give a little bit of context. Basically, the width of the tape is consistent and provides an offset hard edge to measure from and trim. I'll lay down a strip of tape on the body with one edge along the cut. If I put tape down on the new quarter panel and line up the outside edge with the outside edge of the tape on the body, I now have a very accurate line to cut and trim the quarter panel down to. It makes fitment quick and easy. I'll do this a few times with various width tapes to get as close as I can. The closer it fits, the less fiddling and welding you need to do later. I do this a bunch of times and only take off a little at a time to make sure I don't take too much off. I can always take more off. It's a little more difficult to add it back on. The next set of Cleco pins went down in the bumper taillight area that I had mentioned earlier. This surface and spot weld area is again pretty much the same between the wagon and sedan. Having the quarter panel rigidly attached in these two areas now shows just how much the panel needs to be worked to match the body. I used tin snips to trim the panel. Nibbler would make life way easier in this situation, but snips are cheap, and I had already blown the budget that month on Haltech parts and other goodies for the car. One thing that I found helpful was to mark the location of the body line where it intersects with the taillight housing with a Sharpie or tape. It'll help with the orientation of the panel, and it reminded me not to accidentally pound it flat while fitting the panel. I had to kind of make this line artificially on the right-hand side of the car, and that took some extra time. 3 days into this project, I believe. 3rd day. 4th or 5th day overall? I don't know. It's a Friday today. We did a decent amount last night. We got this thing pretty well tucked in the way that we wanted along the top and the inside of the door jamb. I have a bit of a gap right here that I'm gonna have to try to fill with weld, but that's okay. I'm feeling more confident. I need to finish trimming this little section where it's gonna tie into the taillight and wagon back body area. We need to grab the hammer and beat this panel this way and stretch the metal to get this face here to better match up with the new quarter panel, because we need that space. But we need to figure out how to get the inner wheel arch to match up with the quarter panel. And I have the entire rear well and strut tower area actually from the Sedan that I cut this off of. So we can cut that arch strip and graft it on so it lines up nicely. From there, we just need to keep getting this thing to fit nicely. We need to do a little bit more in the door area here. Oh, you're not going to be able to see that. So right here in this door area, I don't know if this was the best way to do it, but this is the way that I did it on the other door, and it came out really nicely, I think. I need to trim out a little bit more right here and then work on blending this together because I want this panel to sit nice and flat. I took a lot of care in making sure that the body lines matched up on this side so that I would have to do less metal working later. You can see sitting pretty nice through there. We're just going to keep chipping away. I don't know what happened to the rest of the footage of trimming and lining the panel up. Pretty disappointed I lost that. I continued on with tape and trimming and filing and fitting until all the body lines matched up and the panel fit perfectly. I used all 50 Cleco pins I had to pin the panel entirely into place. I'll have to fill all of those little holes, but that's a small price to pay to keep everything straight and in very repeatable positions. You can see I moved back to the door jamb area. I did spend an awful lot of time in this area making sure that the fitment was absolutely perfect. This area and where the quarter panel kind of lines up with the rear bumper are the two most important areas to make sure you get your fitment absolutely perfect. Every time you open the door, you'll notice a little bump on the edge of the quarter panel if you don't line up the door jamb just so. And you'll notice that there will be a big gap between the quarter panel and the bumper if you don't line it up properly down in that area as well. It's a bit tedious, but it's absolutely worth it. While the quarter panel was mounted on the car, I took the opportunity to grind all of the paint off in the areas that are going to get welded. I did this on the ground on the other quarter panel, and I kind of mangled the panel up. There was nothing really to support it. Using the body itself and all the Cleco pins to hold the panel in place, I was able to use a little bit more pressure and more effectively remove the paint, using a combination of a flap disc on my angle grinder and a wire wheel on an impact driver spinning at Mach Jesus. The next major hurdle is the inner wheel arch. I haven't seen any details on how people have handled this online, so I went in kind of blind. Perfect. It was an afterthought on the right-hand side of the car, and it was more work to make the panel and the wheel arch fit after than it should have been. I was determined to make this side more efficient. I would say that there's an upper and a lower inner fender area that are connected to the quarter panel differently. The lower area is the face that I pointed out that needs hammering outwards. That's what I worked on first, and that's when I discovered that the rear end is not symmetrical. There's no material on this side to move outward, and that is what I needed to do. Unfortunately, I worked with what I had and we moved it where we could, and we will weld and trim away as we can. The upper arch is a bit trickier, and if I was being the most efficient, I would have tried my best to cut the inner wheel arch off with the quarter panel from the donor sedan. I ended up welding it back on and filling and fixing each spot weld I drilled out anyway. It also didn't help that I drilled all the way through the spot welds and cut big holes. Don't do that. Remove your spot welds cleanly. Now starts the dance of removing 50 Cleco pins at a time to continuously check fitment of everything over and over. I pulled the quarter panel and trimmed the wagon wheel arch off. Attempting to try to shape metal with a hammer and dolly went not badly, and I straightened the edge that I had just cut rather well. I reinstalled the quarter panel and shoved the trim sedan wheel arch into place. I used C-clamps and clamped the wheel arch to the quarter panel, locking it entirely in place where it needed to be. I thoroughly taped the wheel arch and the fender liner together, carefully removed the clamp, all 50 Cleco pins, in the quarter panel, leaving the sedan wheel arch precariously but somewhat securely taped in place. This is my precision system for finding body panel placement. It worked well. I locked that in with another 8 Cleco pins. Day 4 in the garage. We have the quarter panel pretty much pinned up exactly how we're going to be welding it into place. I like this placement a decent bit. We need to finish up mounting the new inner wheel arch to the existing inner fender well area there. I think I'm going to do that with rivets. I didn't really like welding it on the other one, and I was burning through all the undercoating on the backside. I just really don't want to deal with that, so I think some rivets and a decent amount of seam sealer will be just fine. And then if we need to re-weld it later, we certainly can figure that out. And then clean up the quarter panel and prep it for seam sealer on the backside, and then probably mount it into position for the final time, and then we can start thinking about welding. It's pretty tight through here. I'm going to have to do a decent bit of filling. I got a little overzealous with the cutting in this area, so we'll have to fix that. Alright, now it is time to final attach the sedan wheel arch to the wagon body. I started by applying an epoxy-based primer to both the wheel arch and the wagon body to make sure that I would prevent any rust from forming between the two components. I also applied a layer of seam sealer between the two to help with any movement of the panels relative to each other and to prevent any wear through and rust forming as well. I decided that I wanted to rivet the panel on this side of the car as opposed to welding like I did on the other, because I figured I had better control over the rivets and I could use the Cleco pin holes that I already had as pilot holes and make sure that the panel went in place exactly where I wanted it to and wouldn't affect the placement of the quarter panel relative to the wheel arch. So what I'm spraying here is a little bit of U-Pole Weld-Thru primer. I'm spraying this everywhere that I know that I'm going to have to be welding the quarter panel to the body. There's a lot of areas of bare metal that are going to end up being trapped once I put the quarter panel on, and I'll probably end up burning through normal primer. So I use this Weld-Thru primer in all the locations that are going to sit behind the panel. I'm going to do this on both the body and the quarter panel, which I want to take care to remove any burrs that are hanging out on the back side of the panel that would prevent it from laying perfectly flat against the surfaces on the body. I used a little bit of foaming spray cleaner to clean off any oils or dirts on the back side of the panel, and then I primed the entire thing up with the Weld-Thru primer as well. Attaching the quarter panel was one of the more nerve-wracking things because there is just so much seam sealer everywhere, and I didn't want to smear it into an area where I would end up welding and burning it. I found it pretty easy to line the panel up by putting a Cleco pin through one of the top holes on the quarter panel and then sliding that right into the corresponding hole on the body, which prevented me from swinging the panel around too wildly and getting seam sealer all over the place. Quarter panel mounted for the final time. It is the 31st, so I think this is day 5. We are at the point now where this is never coming off the car again. We have seam sealer all the way around the edges where we're not going to be able to reach anymore. This is kind of the final resting place. We're going to start welding this bad Larry in today, I believe. I'm going to have to do a little extra work to fill in over there. Hopefully it comes out okay. But it's looking pretty good. I'll take you around and show you what I did. Seam sealer runs down the outside of this support on the inside here and all the way around, so we'll be able to weld without lighting any of that on fire. And we'll be able to weld along the pinch weld seam here, no big deal. And start doing the spot welds that we had cut out. We already finished attaching the wheel arch on the inside here. There you go. Can you see without the light? Jeez. We'll tack in along the edge here. There's seam sealer along the outside, so along the inside, so that'll help hold it in place. But we just need a couple little tacks. I might even add some rivets and some tack welds. That's up for debate. We'll weld that seam shut, which will pull this in to be welded down there through the spot welds through the spot welds there, and up and around the backside. And we're just going to keep tacking in along the top. That's the game plan, and along the door jamb here. Lines up very nicely. The door does shut, and it lines up, the body lines line up perfectly. So I'm very happy with how this came out so far. Alrighty, it is day, I don't know, it's the 1st of January. We have most of the Clecos out now, and we have the whole panel tacked in, so today we're going to continue going along, working our way around and tacking in. I ground off the welds a little bit in this area. I'm going to have to pound this out, try to get rid of the bulge just a little. Keep stitching it in everywhere. We have pretty much all of the spot welds already all taken care of all the way down, so that just needs to be cleaned up. And we just need to keep tacking this guy into place, and we're making progress. So we're just going to keep going with that. January 2nd, and we have the quarter panel pretty much fully welded out and ground down to see where I completely missed welding. There's a couple spots that I'm going to add to and fill in a couple holes along the outside. Everything else, seam sealer, perfectly fine. This thing is, it's on there again, but it ain't going anywhere. The last thing to weld out, I don't know if you're going to be able to see it, is the rocker panel area on the door. I didn't want to do this on the other side. I don't want to do it on this side, but that is what we're going to do. Oh, and I forgot about the wheel arch, so I guess we're going to be welding that. And then we can start thinking about seam sealer, primer, body filler. We now have the entire quarter panel welded out. I plugged a couple little pinholes that I had after I finished the first pass at grinding all the welds down. I have a couple little spots to continue to grind down. And we're just going to button this thing up and maybe hit it with a coat of primer and start getting this thing ready to actually be completed and have some body filler put on it and have all this tied in nicely. We're getting there. We're certainly getting there. Only a little bit more to go. All right, so now we have the sedan quarter panel fully welded out onto the wagon body. For all intents and purposes, the wide body on this side of the car is done. The only thing left is to do a little bit of body filler in any of the high and low spots, even everything out, prime and paint everything, and then we can really move on to painting the whole car. Hopefully this was a pretty helpful video and answered some questions if you're trying to do this yourself. If there's anything that you would like to see in more detail, please let me know down below in the comment section. If you like what I'm doing and you want to see more of it, please subscribe and hit that like button. And stay tuned because we're going to be doing blending of the quarter panel with body filler and cleaning everything up in the next video. Thank you very much and have a great night.